There is rising anti-globalization sentiment in many societies. Trade calculations are being overturned by tariff volatility. Now, this is no simple matter because it appears that it is India's destiny that its rise take place in an exceptionally turbulent era. When I look back at my research on the evolution of a global order in the aftermath of a world war, it seems almost glacial in comparison to the mega changes that we are witnessing today. Consider the global landscape now and let us reflect on the intensity of the transformation and its implications. A third of global manufacturing has moved to a single geography, with attendant consequences for supply chains. There is rising anti-globalization sentiment in many societies. Trade calculations are being overturned by tariff volatility. The global energy scenario has changed profoundly, with the US becoming a major fossil fuel exporter and China a key renewable one. There are competing models on the harnessing of data and the evolution of artificial intelligence which jostle with each other. Big tech has become a significant player in itself. New routes of connectivity are emerging, some of them with a strategic purpose. The mobility debate seeks to reconcile skills, demand, and social reactions to them. The application of sanctions, the seizure of assets, the advent of crypto, they have all today changed the face of global finance. Competition for rare earths and critical minerals has become visceral, even as technology controls have further tightened. The quality of weaponry and the nature of war itself has been transformed, making it more standoff, more impactful, and definitely more risk-prone. Now, the strategic consequences of such deep change across a broad swath of human activity occurring in such a short time frame is surely very profound. We see an erosion in sovereignty facilitated by tech penetration and manipulation. Global rules and regimes are being revisited and at times even discarded. Cost is no longer the defining criteria for economic transactions. Ownership and security are equally so. End-to-end risks are rising, beginning with the concentration of production, moving through limited supply chains, and then to the dependence on key markets. Alliances and understandings are being reviewed and renegotiated. A belief in balance of power is being replaced with actions based on margins of power. Cumulatively, the world is witnessing more competition and less compacts. The needle has shifted towards an intersection of interests and away from the promise of cooperation. It is driven by the weaponization of everything, with less inhibition to use available tools. Now, all nations face these predicaments, but while a majority of them are struggling to cope or busy defending their interests, India has to strategize, and India has to continue rising amid such volatility. Friends, the challenge for analysts and practitioners alike is to accurately read this complex and evolving landscape. Only then can we figure out how best India can calculate and respond. Now, this is by no means a defensive stance. We have to safeguard our interests and yet continuously advance up the global hierarchy. We have to de-risk our exposures and engagements and yet take risks when necessary. We have to appreciate that interdependence is both a stabilizer and at the same time a vulnerability. And the world is all about being on the positive side of that ledger. From India's perspective, three driving forces of demand, of demographics, and of data will propel its rise. While this is naturally a domestic agenda, the foreign policy implications are to weigh the pros and cons of our choices. Not just that, indeed to maximize the freedom of choice itself. Along with that, we have to create the ideas, the concepts, the terminology, the explanations, and the narratives for the journey towards 2047. This is what awaits the SIS of the future. Now, every domain has its own truisms and fundamentals. Even as we look ahead, it is essential to appreciate the lessons of the past. And few are better placed to undertake that exercise than an SIS which is entering its 8th decade. Probably the most obvious of them is the importance of realism and the significance of national capabilities. Both were underestimated in the early decades after independence, with costs and consequences that we all know well. Our goodwill towards neighbors cannot presume that they necessarily reciprocate that sentiment. The value of territory and its strategic implications must never be taken lightly. The defense of our boundaries needs the requisite infrastructure, not just declarations of intent. If nations have permanent interests, then adjusting policy to global shifts must be accepted as a necessity. These learnings have been taken into account by policy formulation in the last decade. Now, allow me, in addition, to highlight 10 particular dimensions of change that we have also seen in the same period. 1. Relationships need to be continuously tended, not episodically addressed. That is why we see a more intense diplomacy and a more high-profile one within the subcontinent itself and with the Gulf, ASEAN, Central Asia, and major powers. Some bilateral visits have actually taken place after decades, after a gap of decades. 2. In our own region, we have to ourselves underwrite the infrastructure for cooperation if it is to be proofed against political volatility. This is the essence of neighborhood first policy. India has to be the go-to option in any crisis for the entire subcontinent. 3. The maritime aspects of our interests and concerns must not be underestimated. It is not just past history. It continued till the first decade of this century. That is why we now have the Sagar and the Mahasagar outlook. 4. The strategic diminishing of India as a result of the partition has to be overcome, and it has to be done by reaching out to the extended neighborhoods. This explains the Act East, the Link West, the C5+1, and the Focus Africa initiatives. 5. Even as we optimize our positioning among major powers, the constituency of the developing world should be continuously cultivated. Therefore, India proposed the Voice of the Global South summits and undertook the Vaccine Maitri initiative. 6. As our economy grows, so too do our responsibilities and in fact the world's expectations of India. That is why we have emerged as a regular first responder and a reliable development partner with projects today in 78 nations across various continents.